He never married, which wasn't all that uncommon amongst people of his class and calling. Okay. It was not long before his time that it was not possible to be a married Don.
Just a question on his reputation as an author. You mentioned H.P. Lovecraft. Yes. I don't know if anyone saw the recent documentary that appeared on ABC, but it mentioned in that documentary that he found success very difficult, and I'm wondering what sort of publications that Mr. James found publication in, and if he experienced the same problems that Lovecraft did in terms of reputation and what people thought of the particular genre he was writing in.
Well, the cases aren't really all that close. James was an established scholar. The bulk of his publications were in that line. You can trawl through issues of periodicals like the English Historical Review, for instance, from the 20s and 30s, and every couple of numbers you'll find something signed simply the Provost of Eton, which is the way James preferred to sign his articles. His book publications were mostly in the same vein. One of those, in fact, has also almost become a popular work. That was his translations of the biblical Apocrypha under the title The Apocryphal New Testament.
Is there any, now were they contemporary, those two writers? Is there any evidence that M.R. James influenced Lovecraft, or that they...
Yes, there is. Lovecraft wrote a very long essay on supernatural horror in literature, in which he devotes a section to the works of M.R. James.
Okay.
And it's quite clear that he admired James's work quite a bit. The converse wasn't the case. There's no evidence that James had ever read any of Lovecraft's fiction. He had read that essay.
Okay.
And there's a letter in which he commends Lovecraft's industry in putting it together, but deprecates his prose style.
Okay.
Did he write anything that was autobiographical?
Yes. A volume of autobiography called Eden and Kings.
There's been a recent upsurge of interest in literary hoaxes, and they've become quite notorious. Is it fair to say that James was a literary hoaxer?
Probably not fair to say that exactly. Rather to say that he was the sort of man who could have been a successful literary hoaxer had he not been so honest.
So he made it clear to people when he was publishing these pieces that they were...
Oh yes, they were published as fiction.
As fiction.
Okay. My friend from Philadelphia, who I mentioned, she made the comment that so many of these successful ghostwriters, Victorian ghostwriters, were sons of clergymen. I don't know if there's any reason for that. I suppose growing up in a scholarly environment from an early age.
Give him a good start, yes.
Yeah.
I was wondering if I could hear your views on how ghostwriters during the period of Victorian era, earlier 20th century, were considered in light of as a genre. Like in the 1940s, particularly in the 40s with science fiction writers, they used the term speculative fiction because they didn't want to put their names to being science fiction writers, because science fiction was regarded as less serious literature. How were ghostwriters considered by the reading public in those days?
Well, there weren't many who were identified solely as ghost story writers. You'll find some of the great names in English literature have turned their hand to the ghost story. Charles Dickens, for instance. but I can't think of any other than M.R. James who were specialist ghost story writers.
So, would you consider that H.P. Lovecraft's problem was that he wrote in an area that wasn't widely regarded by the reading public? Like his speciality was more in horror, the supernatural. He didn't really turn his writing in other areas, and maybe that's why he was considered to be a lesser writer compared to other writers of his era.
Partly that, I think. Partly also his own personality. He was more or less constrained by a set of values, a set of attitudes that kept him from pushing his work, kept him from trying harder for publication than he actually did.